Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Kara again. I wanted to jump into who the key players are in the NICU. In some previous videos, I've talked about what the NICU is, some reasons that babies may end up in the NICU, and what to do if you're experiencing signs of early labor, and some things that you might be able to do prior to having a preterm birth that can help the birth outcomes. So once we end up in the NICU, it's really important to understand who is in the NICU, what their roles are, and how they're at play. And it's like a really steep learning curve. No one who has a baby really ever intends to end up in the NICU. It's usually not part of most families' care plans or family plans. But it's important to always recognize that it is a possibility. And this video is not to scare, or any of these videos are not meant to scare, but just to arm you with the knowledge in case you find yourself in a position where you're caring for your infant in the caring for your infant in the NICU. Okay, so we all know that in hospitals there are nurses. There are also NICU nurses. We're going to talk about why it's important to choose a primary nurse if that is available to you in a little bit, but put a pin in that. There's a charge nurse. So the charge nurse rotates, and the charge nurse is who you go to if you have any issues. So if you need a new nurse, if the nurse that you are working with or is working with your baby is not vibing with you, if they are not respecting you, if they are not respecting baby and your boundaries, it is okay to go to the charge nurse and ask for a new nurse. You can actually ask to have a nurse completely removed from your child's and your family's care, and they have to respect that. So the charge nurse is going to be kind of the person to go to if you need to go to anyone above who you're currently working with, because they are the manager of the floor at that time in the hospital. There's also providers that are called RTs, which stands for respiratory therapists, and they control the vents and the oxygen. So many babies in the NICU will be receiving a supply of oxygen that are controlled by vents in order to make sure that they're getting enough oxygen into their lungs and into their bloodstream. There's neonatologists. These are specialists that can rotate in and out, and they specialize in the care of newborns that end up in the NICU. There's also even more particular specialists. So one of them is hematology. They work with blood. Cardiology works with the heart, and pulmonology. So these are common NICU specialists that might come in and out of care that are trying to make sure that everything is okay with babies' blood, heart, brain, blood, cardiovascular system. There's the front desk people. And we all know that it doesn't matter how great the care can be. They could have all of the best specialists in the world, but when the front desk person is rude, it can be really a huge challenge. So the front desk people at the NICU are there to make sure that people are being screened in, screened out, that babies are not being taken by anybody that shouldn't take them, that people aren't coming in that could be sick, that could not have authorization to come into the NICU. That being said, they can kind of be the gatekeepers of the NICU as well. So it is important, if you're having any issues with the front desk staff, to ask for a charge nurse. You'll get pretty familiar with them if you have a child in the NICU, especially if it's a NICU that doesn't have rooming in, and we'll talk a little bit about the structure of how some NICUs are set up in a moment. That you'll be coming in and out, because baby will stay in the NICU, but oftentimes you will not. If you are still hospitalized yourself after having given birth, you are supposed to be able to come in and out of the NICU as many times as you want. COVID policies had made that a little bit strange, especially for parents who had left the hospital or who else could come in and out. And even so, most of the time, for instance, a doula, if you are working with a doula and that doula leaves, if they are not employed by the hospital, they cannot go in and out of the NICU. So caring for an infant in the NICU can limit some of your support people and who are able to access you and your baby when you are visiting in the NICU or staying in the NICU. There is going to be lactation and feeding support. So I've mentioned in previous videos that feeding is an incredibly important tool for healing baby. All of us need food to survive. All of us need good nutrients. So either like an IBCLC or a lactation counselor may come in and talk to you about feeding baby, making sure that baby has adequate nutrition. If you're interested in pumping, if they're not talking to you about whether you're interested in pumping and feeding baby with your own milk supply, ask them to see an IBCLC, tell them that you want to, because we can help initiate milk supply and you can actually still feed your baby from your milk supply in the NICU. If that's not something that you want to do, or it's not something you feel like you can do, or you've been told you can't do, make sure that you get a second opinion on that first. If it's something that you want to do, but you're feeling like you can't or that you're not sure of. There are often milk banks at the hospital, which are a supply of donor milk that can be given to NICU babies in order to support their healing and development. Formula feeding is also an option. They can help counsel you through that. Sometimes you can combination feed to make sure that it's supplemented, but oftentimes babies in the NICU, especially preemie or like ultra preemie babies, are going to have to be fed through other technologies rather than a latch initially. So that's why it's really important to be coordinating with your care providers to make sure that your baby is being fed the way that you want your baby to be fed, and that you're exploring all the options that you have at your disposal. Sometimes they have child life teams or peer support. So a child life team is usually a person or a few people that help families with some of the non-medical needs of you and your baby in the NICU. So that can be like how to bond, that can be connecting with other parents who have been through similar experiences. It can be education on how to care for a NICU baby, or especially around discharging, like how to care for a NICU baby once you get home, because you're not going to necessarily have the typical experience of caring for your baby right after birth in the same way, and then being able to continue that care outside. Like we get a lot of practice in that first couple hours, sometimes that first couple days at the hospital. But when there's a lot of medical providers intervening, or it's not quite possible to hold your baby just yet, or to change their diapers without a lot of support, sometimes they're catheterized or they have other technologies assisting them. It can be a really steep learning curve to get used to taking care of your baby. Other times, the reality is, as a parent who uses some substances, sometimes CPS will ask you to go to an inpatient treatment facility. And I want to be really real about this possibility, and I want to be super transparent because it's really hard and it is very scary and very traumatic, and really important that you have people in your baby's care team that you trust and people in your support network that you trust, so that you can feel supported and knowing what's going on with baby and still like you're playing an active role in their care. So if baby is not able to discharge with you, to your treatment program, or if you're in a treatment program that doesn't allow you to take your newborn with you, making sure that you have people that you can contact at the hospital or people in your care circles that are able to keep you up to date and keep you informed on what is going on, and that will have to be signed off on a release of information and a care plan. So sometimes that also looks like a social worker. The social workers at the NICU are most likely going to be doing that higher level of care coordination if you go to treatment or if you go home. They're always usually on that family team decision meeting that I talk about in the what to expect or what to know about CPS and your rights. So if when you have a child and that child is ready for discharge, or you are going into a family team decision meeting with CPS, if it is earlier than that, the hospital social worker is usually present to give CPS the information that they're asking for that is being gathered by the hospital. So take that with a grain of salt, take that with the caution that it is. Social workers can have access to a lot of resources. They can be really strong communicators between different programs and have a lot of doors and leeway open to them. But hospital social workers are mandated reporters, and they will have to answer to Child Protective Services. So things that you want to keep in confidence, that is your right. Like, you are much like when you are talked to about your rights with the police, you have rights with your medical providers too, and they are not entitled to your information that you do not want to provide for them. They are there to provide you and your child care. I mentioned a little bit that sometimes there is peer support for preemie parents. So that's other parents who have been through NICU stays for premature babies. I will say that this could be a really good experience, but we don't really know. So we don't know how culturally competent the hospital is, or whether or not they are going to be able to connect you with a peer parent that's going to be mindful and considerate of your experience. And, you know, it is important for you to use your judgment and choose a path that feels best for you to protect your emotional, mental, and like spiritual well-being when it comes to who you confide in for support. And that's not to say that you shouldn't. So it's just letting you know who is available to you. And I mentioned, as always, doulas and midwives. So some hospitals have doula programs. Some hospitals may allow you to have your doula in the NICU depending on the level of the NICU and the circumstances. So I have been able to go into the NICU, especially right after labor and delivery, when I've had a patient that is still needing their own care after labor and delivery, and they aren't able to be transferred up to the NICU or like move up to the NICU with baby, and they've wanted me to accompany baby so that they know that somebody that they trust is in the room. Sometimes if the doula is employed by the hospital, that they can go in and out. And sometimes if you decide to put your doula as a person who has authorization, oftentimes this is very limited. You may only get to have one other person that's able to go to the NICU. Sometimes they allow more. It's up to hospital policy, and it's usually up to the level of like medical fragility of the babies in the NICU and the level of care that they're providing, whether or not you can have your doula or your midwife go to the NICU to visit baby, to visit you, etc. And again, like some hospitals employ midwives, so those hospital midwives might have more access than, say, a community midwife or a midwife that you access through a birth center and then had to be transferred to a hospital, or baby had to be transferred to a hospital for NICU care. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I hope that this was really helpful. I hope it helped you understand who is present in the NICU, who you might be interacting with, and how you can advocate for the people that you want in your circle. I'm just going to leave it with, I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that it's been recommended by several preemie parents to choose a primary nurse. What that means is that if possible, when you are in the NICU and you might have a bunch of different nurses coming in and out of the room, you might feel like you have to keep telling your story, telling your baby's story, catching them up to speed on your situation. And that can be really, really exhausting. You might also just not vibe with certain nurses. Like some nurses, you might be like, I don't really like this person, or I don't feel like I have a higher level of trust with this person to care for my baby. So especially if your child is having a longer hospital stay, I would keep in mind who those nurses are that you have a good rapport with, that you trust, and ask if they can be your primary nurse, which basically means that they are going to be assigned more consistently, if not like completely, to a rotation of care with your child. So you know that you will have this nurse that has kind of your backstory, knows your baby, knows you, to be in care and consultation with the two of you on a more consistent and ongoing basis. So I hope, again, this was helpful, and I'll see you in future videos and hopefully future workshops and classes. And thanks for being here. All right, talk soon.